All right, Zig coming in on the top. Today on the show, we are joined by the Chicago-based band MIIRRORS, MIIRROS, MIIRRORS. I left off the description of the music because I'm not quite sure how to define it, but it's good. And I'm joined by Shawn Rios and Brian McSweeney, drummer and singer-songwriter. And together, they are MIIRRORS. They have a new album out called Motion and Picture. It's available now on all streaming platforms. And we're going to listen to a tune. This is the first tune off the record called Parallax. All right, the tune, Parallax, Motion and Pictures, the record, MIIRRORS, the band. Available now on all streaming platforms. Check it out. The whole record is fantastic. They do a really, really cool version of a Jeff Buckley demo called Gunshot Glitter, and it's definitely worth your guys' time. This interview was a bit sonically. There was some weird occurrences. It was done on one of those conference call things, so it's got a tone to that. And I think Brian was moving somewhere, or doing something, so there's weird sounds and noise throughout it. But for the most part, it's audible. Very minor things. I did a pretty good job of cleaning it up. But there's gonna be some weird if, ands, or whats. But what they get into is what matters, and we get into it in this conversation. Before we get into this conversation, if you can rate, review, subscribe to the podcast on any of the podcast platforms, it helps me keep talking to cool guests like these guys from MIIRRORS and sharing their insights with you. And without further ado, here's my conversation with MIIRRORS. Can you tell me about 7 Day Jesus?
Yeah, so I grew up in church. My dad was a preacher, and in West Virginia. So that was kind of like the lexicon that I grew up with, you know. The adults in the room are telling you something, so you believe it because you're a child. So I grew up with kind of that world and that lexicon, and I started playing music. And, I mean, my parents had like a Southern gospel quartet when I was a baby, so I kind of, music was all around, and it was gospel music, so that was my world. And when I started making music seriously as a teenager, that was the language that I used, because again, that was the language I'd kind of grown up with. So I was in a band, and we made some demos, and we got a record deal randomly with the indie label in California, and we just kept playing music, and it kept escalating, and then I found myself a handful of years later questioning a lot of this stuff. I don't know if this is my world view. I don't know if I believe all this. And being in the industry of Christianity, I don't know. I saw a lot of things that really just didn't align with how I wanted to spend the next 15 years of my life. So I just quit that and moved to Chicago. And that's probably immediately when I met Shawn.
Because it's interesting, being in the industry of anything, you're kind of like, oh, this is dirty. This, you know what I mean? There's a thing that takes away the beauty of in that case, belief and faith, right? In when it's turned into a thing where it has to be reached out and has to be presented a certain way, and you have to do a certain thing, it takes away the individuality of what's beautiful about that. And the music industry is even worse. to get both ends of that in the combo wombo, I can see where in a formative kind of time like that, that's most people when they're yeah, I was in a teenage band, we played some bars, but I found the video for Butterfly. I'm like, this looks like a Foo Fighter video. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
That was definitely concurrent with The Color and the Shape. That was the big album at that time, and that's what kind of all the bands were listening to.
So I guess what would be interesting to growing up around gospel music, it's a different approach. And it's a different, kind of the friends I know that do church bands, and just their musicality is different than just diving into bands like the Foo Fighters. They're kind of put off by that. So was there like a crossover during that time where you're like Bright Eyes is dope, while experiencing this, or was that like post in the trying to find?
No, I mean, I was into, I had been into rock music like at the same time. And I'll say like in the mid to late 90s, that was a time in Christian music where there were a lot of bands that really didn't sound like they were Christian at all. Like they were just bands making really good music. And the lyrics were more or less about religion and faith. But yeah, that was a different time. Unlike now where again, you couldn't tell just by, like, if you didn't know certain bands were a Christian band, like you wouldn't know. And a lot of that was, there were Midwest bands, but a lot of that was the West Coast, honestly. Like that was kind of where like Seattle and LA, those were kind of the hubs for that. But yeah, I was into rock music. When I was a teenager also, I listened to heavy metal and pop music. 80s pop music, I'd say probably informed my sensibilities more than anything else, at least initially.
Okay. Because, you're right. Like with like Creed, or bands like that, you don't really think of that as being right on the nose. But so Shawn, like, what with your musical background, was it similar?
No, I did not come up in music based in faith. No, any type of faith that came into my life came into when I was 21. It didn't really. I was raised in Chicago, half Mexican, half Irish as a Catholic, and that's just what you are because that's the way that the culture is. But I really didn't come to any type of faith that I would call my own in that world until I was 21. So that was a much different adult experience. I haven't had those music business Christianity experiences that Brian has had, and I've always been very interested to hear more and more of what Brian went through. At the same time, I have a lot of other friends that went through it as well, and it was equally as bad, if not worse in some cases. I think faith is very difficult when you mix commerce into it because you're mixing the ideal with human experience. You're mixing the ideal with human nature.
Right.
And where those two can combine and really create something beautiful, I think when you are setting up an expectation of a return on investment, ultimately someone can really potentially get very hurt. And that can really create a more of a long-term shift in someone's life because they're basing an eternal belief on it. So I understand that. I completely understand. But for me, it was in my music upbringing, it was more family-oriented. It was more at the same time around between age 6 to 10, I specifically remember being raised simultaneously on disco, soul music, heavy metal, or what you would call classic rock now, new wave, early, sort of the early 4AD bands, Cocteau Twins, all the creation bands coming out of England. So all that was happening at the same time because my family was very close, still is very close. And while my cousins and siblings are older, music is still part of that fabric. It's still something that connects us. So for me, it was a lot of music exposure and concert exposure before I even began playing a drum kit. And I was self-taught at the time. I really didn't have any lessons until much, much later in my life, I would say in my 30s. Maybe even late 20s is when I started to take type of formal instruction. At that point in your musical career, you're more studying under someone than going to classes, than going to, the local music store. So I was sort of a late bloomer in terms of studying technique and studying under people. But I'm glad that I did when I did.
I think like when you're doing it at that point, it's like it's the most practical in a way. Like you can really relate.
Yeah.
I see where this is going to pay off. And like when you do it at a younger age, or when you start doing these techniques before seeing where they're going to go, like I guess
Yep.
the benefit of that is just doing it, being like, oh yeah, I guess this is these like this sticking and this like how rudiments work here in this like rock tune. I never noticed that until you're doing it. Like, but there's kind of a different payoff when you know it right away. You know what I mean? Like see, oh, this is how this is working in a different like creative kind of insight.
That's exactly. Yeah, you nailed it. Since I was 16, especially when I moved back to Chicago, when I was 23, I began to get involved in as many bands as I possibly could because I figured out that would be my music school. That real-time experience on the road with a lot of bands, real-time experience in as many studios as I could play in and record in, that would be the path that I chose to get educated as quickly as I could because I was already in the present tense. I wasn't in preparation for that. I was in that. So did I carry a little imposter's guilt, as I think as everyone's calling it these days? Or is it imposter syndrome, imposter's guilt, whatever it is? Yeah. Because here I was in bands at the same time with people that were, top of their class coming out of DePaul Music School and also Columbia. And that's incredible. And I learned so much from them. I'm grateful that I did. And looking back, just looking back, I don't know how I pulled it off, but I did. And I was able to hang with some of these guys. And I'm grateful that I could,
Yeah. It's interesting in that sense because, like, to jump right into it and kind of just learn on the fly like that, a lot of times, like, I feel like the academic, like, route takes you to places where it's like, okay, you expect certain things. So, in a way, you're, like how you're saying, you're the opposite. You're not in the moment of, like, I'm doing this. And another, like, aspect of that, too, is, like, the availability to be like, yeah, I can do that. See you then. You know what I mean? Sure. See you then. Like,
absolutely. Yeah. I said yes a lot over and over through the years, and I gained a lot of experience from that. And now here I am at a different period in my life where I want the academic. I want to learn these things. I want to continue to grow in those areas on top of the experiential. It just rounds out the experience. It rounds out your understanding of language. And that's really what this comes down to. Music is language. It's a different type of language. So I would say in that sense, teaming up with Brian, even before we started playing music together, I would say that Brian has probably been one of the more influential, important teachers of my musical career. It's interesting. You're friends with someone that long, and you watch their successes and failures from afar, and you watch how things happen. You watch how things work. And by the way, I'm not even referring just to Brian when I say that, but the many people that you wind up coming in contact with and you play with, and they become your family, whether it be an extended musical family or something more direct where it turns into a real friendship, like I had with Brian. But yeah, Brian has definitely had that influence on me. Definitely taught me a lot through the years. And I don't think that's going to stop.
Yeah, well, with that, it's like with the kind of approach to like accepting, not even accepting, but examining failure, and like that, like because so much of that is like kind of out of like you as a friend, you're like, oh, this is sick. What they recorded is amazing. Why isn't everyone aware of this? You know what I mean? And that doesn't make it a failure in a way. It's just what is that thing? And or musically seeing like that would be rad if it had that beat behind it, or you know what I mean? Like as a drummer, like you start to orchestrate in a way that other musicians don't, and like that's what makes a drummer's perspective really profound in a way. But
and that's why so many drummers are producers.
Yeah, yeah, and that makes sense, like, because you're behind that, you're producing the show as it goes, you know. Um, but it's interesting. I've been working on this book, reading this book by Kenny Warner. Are you familiar?
No.
He's a jazz
No.
pianist. Um, and like he had this bit in there about music as language, and he's like, a lot of musicians like say they want to sound good when they're doing a thing. Like I just want to make sure I sound good, you know. And like he's like, if you put that in the concept of just language, that becomes very shallow. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I don't want to say anything. I just want to make it
Yeah,
sound
that's actually
good.
a good point.
And I was like, wow, that's pretty heavy. And in a way, coming from
That is
like,
a pretty language. That's a good point.
right? Because there's a lot of times like, how do you put your full self into it? And like coming from a place where like with Brian's background in a way where it's like kind of like supposed to be heavy in a way, like this is really meaningful. It means all this, but make sure you use this and you know, land here or whatever direction. Like they would kind of aid you in that, and just like trying to find that. But I guess what I was going to say was to kind of have that kind of already fulfillment in a way of self-knowledge in a way, knowing what you didn't want to do and knowing what doesn't work, I think really impacts what you guys have done and are doing. So you guys met on a plane?
Yeah.
We did.
We did.
Yeah.
I will let Shawn tell you about that, but I just want to take a second and I want to spend a second on what you just said. I think that's very true. I think Shawn and I, having both been in multiple musical scenarios for several years, brought us to a place where when we started playing, we really knew what we didn't want. And what we did want was maybe self-defining as we continued to play, but we definitely knew what we didn't want. And it was very helpful in, you know, kind of helping us get to where we are now. But the airplane thing, yeah, that's another thing.
Yeah, that was that you know, talk about moments that definitely shape the rest of your life, or at least most of it. We were both on a connecting flight to Atlanta. He was meeting his band, and I was meeting someone, I think, on my way to Los Angeles. And the flight was empty, and we were sitting in the back with no one else around when Brian was sitting directly behind me wearing a pair of headphones. And I noticed that. I kept to myself. Towards the end of the flight, when we began descending, he tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, man, listen to this." And it wound up being the first single from the Icelandic band MIIRRORS. I'm not going to try to pronounce it, but it was a really beautiful song. It's a song that really broke them, and they went up on a motion picture soundtrack after that. And he had a little Sony Discman, and I remember listening to that and thinking at the same time, if this guy has this type of sensibility, what else is he about? And we kept in touch. We got each other's information, kept in touch. I learned that he was in a band that I really admired, and I started watching the videos and seeing what they were up to from afar. But then I began to check out his band, and would see him around time, you know, different places around town, and we started hanging out more consistently. And that was before we even really began playing music together. Before we even began jamming together, I think we just accepted each other as friends, as humans. And that was great because there wasn't an agenda. Did I want to play with him? Absolutely. You know, I can't say he felt the same way about me. I don't think he really knew much about me. But that aside, I really thought, well, this is the guy I want to know for a long time. I was very interested. I think we were both in a place of rediscovery. I think we were both in the place of questioning not only what we believed, but who we were. And that's what happens at that age. That's exactly what happens at that age. Or I should say, that's what should happen at that age.
Yeah.
People don't reach that. Some people don't reach that, but Brian and I, we think to a fault sometimes. But I will say it was really lovely starting with the friendship first, and it wasn't until sometime down the line when I think that Brian began to see my consistency in my involvement in things, and I think when I began to see his availability with his involvement in things, I think that's when Brian had suggested we finally get together and start working on some music. Now, we had jammed before in 2004, 2005, just for fun, just to feel each other out, just because we had time in between the bands that we were in. I was in 7 bands at the time. And I think at the time, Brian was really working a lot in being a co-writer with people. I think Brian was trying to find his foot and trying to find out geographically where he was going to land. And at the time, he was in Nashville. If I have that correct, I think he was going back and forth, and Brian had already gotten involved in teching, doing a lot of tour teching on the road. So Brian was everywhere, and he traveled in a way that I really admired. I wanted to do that much traveling. I wanted to have that kind of experience. So when we started working on things in a more serious manner, that's when we figured out that this could be something that could really sustain, that we had material already that we felt we could work towards the idea of an album.
That's interesting with like this kind of off what before diving into the plane story, what Brian said, in just that kind of moment of time where you're kind of self-analyzing, and then the band name's MIIRRORS. You know, the self-reflection is it's kind of like you in a mirror you can see what you want to see. Is this group kind of that? Was that kind of like the forethought of the name, or is the name just that? Because yeah.
The idea of the name was that we are mirrors to each other, and that we can't help but be. Like when you're talking to another person, no matter what you are trying to put out, or whoever you're trying to be, when you're interacting with other people, you are getting feedback back from them that is reflecting to you who you are, who you truly are.
You know, when you think about it too, we are what we do. The music that we listen to, the music that we choose, the type of films that we choose, the kind of art that we absorb, oftentimes it reflects the things. It sort of reflects where we stand at that time. So for us to take this to the public, for people to share in what we're doing musically, but also visually when we play a show, I think reflecting to them is equally as important. I think the way that they absorb music, the way that they experience what they see when we share this stuff with them. You know, it's very important that continues.
I think that's well said, and like I think that really kind of matches like the music that's on the record, and like one thing I like going through it. Like when Howard sends me anything, I just listen to it. You know, I don't read anything until after listening to it. And with Parallax,
sure,
like the first tune, I was like, I'm in. This is so different, like from what Howard normally sends me. And like, I was like, this is like the vocal delivery on it. Like I really got like Radiohead kind of vibes going. And is that kind of like an influence, would you say, on some of these tracks? Like more
Radiohead is a band that we both respect a lot. Yeah.
Because
Radiohead is one band that pretty much everybody in our band agrees on, that, you know, they have been influential to us for sure.
Because like
there are many bands, but they definitely are a big one.
Okay, cool. Because like there's something to that space that type of music allows, that has that kind of reflection in a way. Like, and maybe I'm hearing that Radiohead influence kind of tonally, and like vocal delivery on some of the tunes, like Sinistry. Like even in your guys' live video, which was very well done, using what me and my buddy Jay called the Yorkerphone, that microphone with I can't I just know it's in their live basement take.
The Neumann.
RE20. Electro Voice RE20.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was going to be Neumann. Sorry.
I mean, a Neumann's always going to be good no matter what. But the one in particular is that like beige looking one with the.
That's right. It's an Electro Voice. They've been around for a long time. They handle low end pretty well. A lot of people usually use them on like bass guitar, but they are very good at like what's called proximity effect. Like you can put your mouth right on it and it doesn't get super bassy and boomy. And it's good for live vocals. Like if you need to put your mouth on the mic and get like a tight sound without getting drums and guitars and everything else like in the microphone, it's good for that. So is the SM7, which is the microphone that everyone in the universe uses for podcasting right now. They're both kind of like, they're both good at that thing.
Yeah. Was it and well, either way, like I was just like, I don't know if that's that sounds like more of a producer nod. Like this is gonna work, but with that type of delivery, like with that kind of like upper head chesty voice, like is that like kind of diving to like listening back to like Butterfly, like and listening to now? There's a similar vocal approach, like. I was like...
Yeah, I'll tell you what it is. When I was a teenager, when I was coming up in church, there was a singer who was a pop Christian singer.
Yeah.
And I'm going to keep this as short as possible. Kind of the godfather of the Christian music industry is this old man named Bill Gaither from Indiana. He basically like has 20 songs in the hymnal. Like he's the OG, right? Yeah. So he tours with a Southern Gospel Quartet and discovers new talent. So when I was a young teenager, he discovered this pop singer named Michael English, a Christian pop singer. And this guy really changed my life. Like his voice, when I heard him sing, it was like, yeah, that's incredible. That he just like had such a powerful, incredibly powerful chest voice, and his range was very high, but his delivery was just so incredibly emotional. And like in hindsight, like knowing what I know about him now, like years later, there were like lots of scandals and stuff. And he got like all these awards. He was like the darling one year. He won all these awards in Christian music. Like Norah Jones, when his first album came out, he won everything. And then he, has an affair and all this crazy stuff happens. And then you find out about his childhood and it's really troubled. And it's like, it's no surprise to me now, like all of the emotion that came through in this man's performances, because he really lived some stuff, and whether it's like Christian music or pop music or whatever, he's a human, first of all, before any style. And I think that's just some of that darkness was really what like came through and made him such a force. And yeah, Michael English, he was the guy that made me want to sing like that. And it wasn't until probably 5 years later that I ever heard Radiohead. And Jeff Buckley. I heard Radiohead and Jeff Buckley right around the same time, but it definitely all started with Michael English. Like if you listen to Michael English, and I'll say the 7 Day Jesus band that I was in, we were in high school and we were into really heavy music. There was a local band in West Virginia called Chum, C-H-U-M, and they were not a Christian band. They were like drop D, drop C guitar, drop B and C, like slow, heavy. And they were our favorite band in the world. All we wanted to be was Chum. So then we start making music, and I'm nuts about this pop Christian singer, Michael English. So I start singing like Michael English over this heavy, slow guitar music, and everybody's like, what is this? And I think that's one of the reasons why the band that we were in was successful and why we got signed, because it was like, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't sound like anything that we've heard. And honestly, I'll just say, like, it was emo before emo was emo. We're talking like 1995. I mean, it really was 1994. That was emo before emo was emo. And, if you listen to the Michael English, you'll hear it, man. It's like, that's what it was.
That's a good description of it. That's a great description of it. It's interesting, like so with the whole like because also Jeff Buckley has that kind of like that same range too, and like did you so with the because you guys cover Gunshot Glitter on which is like a Buckley like B side or a Buckley demo, right? Is that like the first like did you find that weird demo like record before, or is it like
Yeah.
yeah,
So
was that the first one?
before Brian and I met, I would say 3 years before Brian and I met, we, on our own, both of us found Gunshot Glitter on a Japanese import version of My Sweetheart the Trunk. And I'm grateful that we did, because individually that became one of our favorite songs, one of our favorite Buckley songs. It wasn't until I brought it up over dinner, I would say 22 or 23 years later, that, hey, we should do this. And I was surprised at Brian's reaction. He loved it. He knew it right away. He's like, that's the one if we're going to do it. That song and a song called Thousandfold were the two songs that were extra on Sketches. Why it wasn't included beyond me. I don't know why they did not include it in the original pressing, but they should have. And to this day, that's still one of my favorite Jeff Buckley songs, even if it was a 4-track cassette, that he made by himself at his house in Memphis. I listened to that song for the first time in a while, only because we've put so much focus and time into playing that song in the studio, but also playing it live. We perform it live at most of our sets. And it was really fun revisiting it. I hadn't listened to it in a couple of years, and going back to it was really exciting. It really was. It was like, oh my God, it still stood on its own, even though we dared to make a imagined completion of the song. It really is something that's just singular and unique on its own. It's just a gorgeous piece of work, just when you learn about how he made the song and everything percussive. And it's incredible to me that sits in someone's head, as evidenced by this 4-track tape, that is in his head, that swims around in his mind. That's what he thinks about. That's what he puts down. Brian and I were having a talk a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago. We were talking about the thought that it's just a realization to both of us that Buckley never got to stream a song. He never heard things in a digital format beyond CD. He never worked with Pro Tools. There's just so many things that Buckley never saw coming and never got to do. That's fascinating to us, because I think he's one of those last, I hate the word icon. I think it's so bullshit and so overused, but in this case, he really is. He's one of the last greats that was completely coming from an analog world. And I love that. I almost like that he didn't get to hop over to the other side. At the same time, it begs the question, what would it have been like if he did? What would have happened? What would he be thinking?
I love that. I love that train
I don't
of
know.
thought though, like, because that like when someone's that like inspiring or that just like kind of like breathtaking, and then you really just start to analyze. Well, they were working with stones and sticks and like all that. You know what I mean? Like when someone like confounds your brain that much to analyze what they actually had to do it with is like the next level of
That's
like
the difference.
movement. And like
that is the difference right there. That artists of that level, define the take. The take does not define. You can't just say no. That was let's just fix it in post. No, that's not what happened.
I mean, you could punch in, but like you couldn't tune things.
Yeah.
Sure.
And well, there's like, oh man, like I appreciate the technology where what's the program? Not Melodica, Melodyne, thank you. Like, it's such a great tool for fixing like little things, but like I feel like so many people just leave it right up there and don't, if you can fix it, go back and track it again. Now that you know how it goes, you know what I mean? Like, um,
Yeah.
like because if you just leave that like kind of digital fix on it, it comes off. You know what I mean? Like Jeff Buckley sounds so fresh and so real and honest and moving because of that. All the mistakes and flaws that may be in there, like, are him, and like we celebrate those in that sense. Like, they don't sound like flaws in that way. It's a really interesting train of thought with like stuff like that. Like I listened to this. There's this Adam Neely, a YouTube cat, and he took all these like classic soul songs and like ran them through that program and pitch fixed them so they were right on cue, and they're off kilter, like Aretha Franklin and like Bill Withers and Led Zeppelin, like just moving them that little bit, like it's just a little unsettling. So there's that beauty within that margin of error that our brains, I think, relate to humanity within that. But like taking it from this demo to what you guys did with it, like I went back and forth between the two a few times, like, and like you're saying, like it's all kind of there. Like what you guys did, like I think just highlighted what would have been done in the best way. You know what I mean? Like how you were saying, Shawn, all these rhythms in there, and like it's amazing that this demo is so well thought out, in a way. Like this is just an idea he's putting down, and like your guys' take on it is fantastic, and like it fits really, really well with this record. And now kind of hearing your guys' individual like tracking of this record and of Jeff Buckley into your like music career and like life, I think it's very very, very perfectly fitting for the idea of the self-reflection and like, but that's so like, were you messing around with other tunes of his, or is this just the one that just clicked and we're like, this is it?
That was the only one we really considered doing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Partly because it was unfinished, and partly because no one really knew the song. Because when Sketches came out, for very many years, it was only available if you had the Japanese import version of that album. Not even if you bought Sketches, it was not even on there. It was just a very rare song. So we thought, well, number one, we love it. Number two, not many people know it. Number three, like, it's unfinished. So for all of those reasons, it would be, not like a normal cover where there's an expectation, well, you didn't do it as well as the song. It's like, well, the song is a demo.
Right.
So there's, not really much to hold our version up to or up against.
It's almost like kind of someone wrote a song for someone else in that sense, but taking it like to your own. And like, like you're saying, that's a really cool, like, a creative endeavor in that sense, because there is none of those expectations of like, oh, you didn't hit the third harmony here and it didn't sound like Jack Black, so that's not a good Tenacious D cover or whatever.
Right.
But like, so you were kind of working on being a songwriter in Nashville. What was that like as far, I guess, as coming from a place where you're writing your own music? Do you? And I just talked to Vashti Bunyan about this, and she was saying she really has trouble writing with other people, like in the songwriting sense. Like, is that easier for you, or was that whole process?
No, it's not easy at all. I tried it, and I really, I did a handful of co-writes with other people, and there were a few people that I wrote with that, I just haven't done a ton of it. There were a few people that I wrote with that I felt like this could work, but the majority of the co-writes, I really didn't like it. And the reason is because professional songwriters, when you get in a room, you have the intent of, and it's not just the intent, you finish a song when you leave. and then, it might not be super produced or whatever, but it's the skeleton of a song. It might just be a piano sample and then a scratch vocal, but you have the lyrics, you have the structure, and it's super basic. It's, A, B, A, B, C, B. It's like verse, chorus, bridge, chorus. And that's just what it is. But for me, I have songs Shawn and I really came up with the majority of the songs on the first MIIRRORS album from our early sessions, but there are a few songs, one in particular, Knockoff, came from a demo that I made in probably 2004 in Chicago. And I have a lot of songs like that just kick around forever and ever, or even songs that I'm actively working on for an album. I'll really take my time until I figure it out, like a puzzle, until it makes me feel, until every part of the song makes me feel like, yes, I want to listen to this, whether I wrote it or not. I want to listen to it because it's cool and there are little treats and hidden things. And part of that is production, not just lyrics. So I think if you're a professional songwriter, you have to cut way too many corners. And I think that the product suffers, where I like to tease out what's special about an idea. That could take a year. It could take 6 years until you solve it. And that just, to me, I always felt like we're just cutting corners. We're phoning it in. Not that you can't write a great song in a day, because I've definitely finished songs in a day, but that is the rare exception versus
we've done that as a band.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's interesting when you have a time, I guess as far as a practical, I will write for this hour to this hour. That's a great exercise to get your mind in that space. But
it's a good exercise for coming up with a seed.
Yes, that's a song. That's perfect to get a song seed and a nugget, and then to let that seed grow into a plant doesn't happen within a day. It happens within multiple takes with a band and self-examination of what you can do to make it fully
right,
audibly.
And honestly, that process probably still does happen frequently when, let's say a team of songwriters get together and 3 people get together in a room and they write a song. And to me, I would be like, I don't think this is done. That process, when it gets pitched by their publishers to a country artist or whatever, it still that seed might grow up and change into something very different, but not with those 3 writers, maybe with the artist and the producer when they're in the studio. But for me, if I'm the person, if this is my I get attached to an idea, and if this is my last exposure to an idea, I want it to be awesome and exciting. I don't want to just half-ass it and then give it to a publishing company to just throw out there into the world.
Yeah, when you're connected to it and you really because there's those moments of inspiration that you really can see, or you get that feeling where I can make this into something. I don't know what that is, but when I'm writing stuff or when I get that, that will sink in your brain forever until it's done. whatever some of those moments are that impactful, or some of those song seeds, or some of those brief passing bys of us that would be a really cool thing if it did this. So I can see that being kind of a real frustrating in a way, or real gear grinding in the spirit, to see it just kind of be put in a fridge and yeah, maybe someone will eat it,
Yeah. And it's just a different thing. For one person, there are lots of songwriters who don't want to be artists, and they don't want to toil over a song. They just maybe are really clever with coming up with rhyming schemes or metaphors, and where they really get the most joy is coming up with something in an hour, and they don't really care. They're just wow, we really did it. We came up with a cool idea. Because a lot of people who do co-write sessions anyway are writing for pop or country music, and in those cases, it really is about a clever lyric or a clever catchphrase. Whereas what MIIRRORS does is a very different thing. We're creating something more abstract. And and amorphous and maybe a little more difficult to define, and it's not you can't easily put it on pop radio or whatever. And to me, that's just more fulfilling for me. But for someone else, it might be, wow, I don't even want to do what you guys do. That sounds terrible. I just want to come up with like a really awesome seed, catchy chorus lyric, and then just like pass it off to someone else.
I think all of us remember that time. Oh, go ahead. I remember, all of us remember, I think it was in October of 2000 when the first single from Kid A, Optimistic, hit the radio. I remember hearing Optimistic for the first time. I was living, I think, with my first roommates, and I was driving up to the apartment. I was in the parking lot, and the local station here, XRT, played it for the first time. And I remember listening to Optimistic, and I thought, this is so interesting. This makes no sense to me. I've never heard something like this before. I thought I knew this band from OK Computer. And here was a song that there were no snares until the sort of bridge areas that would come in. It was just all toms. I mean, just the whole thing didn't really make a lot of sense to me. And it was so intriguing. And I thought to myself, how is this on radio right now? And it was. And I remember how many people I talked to in that week, if not that month, that were just so moved by that song and so moved by that record when it came out. I remember that record came out, and it just, again, changed a lot of the face of music. It changed production. It changed what can happen vocally. I think Nigel Godrich was then known not only from Radiohead, but from what he was doing, what he was making. It just, everything changed. A lot of bands, some bands broke up. A lot of bands just couldn't hang with that. And I think I remember reading a story or listening to an interview with the guitarist from Limp Bizkit, Wes something, I forgot what his name was. But I remember him talking specifically about wanting to leave that band after hearing Kid A. He was so impacted by where music was going. He was so impacted by a band that really was putting their heart on their sleeve. He was so impacted by such a genuine, authentic presentation of music that he felt embarrassed. I think at that point he took out the black contact lenses and got out of the whole nu metal thing. He quit, and who knows what they're doing now. But my whole point is that what we hear at first can startle us to a point where it locks us in for a long time. That's all I have to say on that. I'm just an example of how something that really doesn't make sense. It is, as Brian said, amorphous. It's the term I've used is that we're giving shape to the abstract. And I think that's the way it's going to continue to be for a while.
I think that's very well said. And I think there's something to that something can be so honest and so pure and so it seems like left field, but it's just them, that it should have that mirror effect on you where you reflect on what you're doing, to try to, if something is that potent, it has that effect and makes you redefine what you should be doing in a way, or just even what you are doing, and trying to find the honesty within it. Because whatever you're doing, if it has that emotional intent that's connected to that core, if it's not you just talking to sound good, but you talking to say something, it's going to, the purity is going to be there in that honest attempt, no matter what style, genre, even if it's technically good or bad, it will resonate. And that's a really, I didn't know that. That's a really cool, impactful story.
Yeah, I'll never forget it. I'll never forget where I was when I heard it the first time. And that happens with a lot of music. But this was something way more abstract that Davis were used to listening to.
Well, and
then we all know what happened after that.
Yeah. Well, and when you know what it is, and when you're equally as curious about it, and it's something that you're attached to too, like to see that reflection, to see like because in our minds a lot of times like we're like I shouldn't say we, but I maybe like you find a cool band that no one knows of, and you're like, this is cool. I'm in the hidden club, and the poet society
Yeah.
of knowing
Yep.
cool words and sounds that move me and
Well
probably
said. That was said.
probably
Right.
don't
Right.
move anyone else. And as soon as you see that, oh wait, this not only moves other people, the music I actively rebel against is taking shape from it. That's cool, man. Like, wow. Oh, that's so
No,
uplifting,
you're
you know?
absolutely. Yeah. Yep. You're absolutely right. I
And
love when that happens.
I guess what it is, it just even the guys that are doing the thing that's corny, you know what I mean, or like you're not particularly touched by when you see them interact in that way, they become human too, and like, and that kind of goes back to the humanness of everything, and like that we were kind of touching upon earlier. That's really cool. Wow.
Yeah. You're exactly right.
Somebody said to me once, I have a friend who is he works in hospice care. He's a director at a hospital in West Virginia, where I grew up. He's one of my best friends. I went to high school with, and we were just talking one day about vulnerability, and he said, vulnerability can be trusted. And I think that's very profound. And I think that when you listen to music where there is some vulnerability, you feel it, whether you have a name for it or not, or whether you know that's what it is that you are experiencing. I think you recognize it. And I think that's where, whether it's like you, when we started this call, you mentioned that, like, what does it mean for music to be good? Like, even if it's technically not perfect, or if you're singing a little off key, like when you're vulnerable and your voice cracks in a recording, like when you're listening to Mannish Boy and, the vocal just cracks into a scream. It's like, gosh, it gives you chills. You feel it. Like that's far from technically perfect, but it's perfect, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's like how you're saying, perfectly vulnerable. And I've done some what they call practicum stuff in hospice, and that's a tough gig. That's a tough place to be in. But like, there's a certain like acceptance you see with people that kind of like deal with death a lot, and there's like even being around some loss and like going through things like that, it redefines how you like take in certain things, and certain vulnerability becomes more clear because of being around stuff like that. And like I'd imagine
Mm-hmm.
like being in the business as like long as you have, and all these different aspects, like I don't like, because that it's really what moves us, is this connection, this acceptance to this vulnerable space. And like, but like as far as like seeing that on the other end of things, is that a thing that like is taken into account at all? I'd imagine it would have to be a little bit from your experience. Um,
What do you mean, the other end of things?
like in the business end of things, do they like kind of like can you do like a more like realistic take of it, or like is it like as far as like working on like
I've
songwriting
definitely
and
been
stuff?
in
Yeah.
situations, you mean like in the studio? I've definitely been in studio situations where
Okay.
people are coaching performances to get more of, whatever emotional response they're looking for out of the performance. But that's been a very long time. I am my own self-police these days.
Yeah. I relate to that. I relate to that. I think we all are to some degree with any recording. But that's the beauty of it. You spend so long learning what you could sound like and what you do sound like, that when you need to sound a certain way, like how to express that, from hours of
Sure.
self-reflection and like grinding your head against, why can't I make it sound like that? um
Yeah.
I guess one last thing I wanted to ask about before letting you guys go. And I really appreciate your time. And the album's fantastic, and I'm
Or
really excited to see. Like, I don't know, are you guys planning on touring?
we are. We're putting together dates right now. Actually,
Nice.
we're scheduling everything for heading out east, heading south, southwest. So I think this year and next, you'll be seeing a lot of us. So I'd like you to catch a show if you can.
Yeah, are you coming to Cleveland?
That's the plan. Yeah, I would like to play Happy.
Play Happy Dog?
Hopefully.
Yeah, I'm really thinking Happy Dog is the place the first time.
Okay, very
I was
cool.
really fond of that place there. I played there some years back with Will Phelan, and I was blown
Yeah.
away at how much I enjoyed it there.
Oh, and then you can
The whole
and you can-
concept of it.
It's wild. Like you don't like. It seems like it's not gonna like. You go in and you're like, oh, people are here to eat. They're gonna walk away when there's a door fine, like a door fee, and like. But it gets slammed. Happy Dog's a bumping spot. People chow down on dogs
It's great,
and
man.
sit up.
It is great. It is so great. The little arcade, little projector room. It's just a wonderful place. I was surprised how well it sounded for being
Yeah.
the type of place and the way it was laid out. I was like, this sounds great. Had a great time. It sounds great. I have a few friends that live out there, and everyone's real cool. Everyone's really into music. There's a scene going on there.
That
So
definitely.
I think when we book the route that takes us out east to the route that takes us east to New York or Boston, that will absolutely be on the way.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, drop me a line. I definitely want to see you guys. But I,
100%. We absolutely.
I wanted to ask about Spasmatic, because that tune, as far as like highlighting both of your guys' like skill set, is like on point. Like, where did that come from? Was that one that was like in the ether, held on for a while, or was that one that came out of jamming?
No, we wrote
Yeah.
that idea when we started playing music together. That was one of the first ideas we wrote.
Really?
That was the first
Yes.
day.
Yeah.
The first
Yeah.
day when we decided to do. That was one of 4 songs that made the record years later. I remember the excitement we felt on that. I remember that specifically. Somewhere there's an iPhone demo of that song that still exists. And I remember the excitement. Not only did we already have all the ideas that we had, that was later in the session. That was towards the end. I think that was one of the last demos.
Yeah, that was one
recorded
of the first songs we wrote, and it was the last song that we finished.
It's incredible. It's incredible.
It really took a long time to get that one right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it finally found its home, and it did it in a very immediate way when it came time to finish it for the record. Brian and I were in Omaha, in Nebraska, and he was doing some solo stuff, and we had some friends from this band called Bird and Butterfly that we were hanging out with out there. And it was while we were trying to figure out how to fly back home because one of our flights got canceled that we decided to divert to Chicago and finally put the pieces together here at my home where we work on writing songs, we rehearse, we work on demoing stuff here at my place. It made sense that that's where we returned to finally finish something that wound up being one of the better songs on the record.
Is that 2 questions on it? Is your place Narwhal Studios? Nardwar is a different guy. Narwhal.
No,
Studios?
no,
It's a
Narwhal Studios is where Brian mixes the. Yeah, Narwhal is where that's where the record was mixed. That's also where we made a film called Definitive Version that we're going to be releasing shortly after the record comes out.
Okay, that's awesome. Like, well, and I guess the other one on that, it's like that's a beautiful cap to like this kind of self-discovery as a group, and like starting with this idea, and because there's that thing when you click something, and like when like you sing with someone and they sing in harmony without knowing, right? Just doing, or if you play something, someone lays that thing that just is super inspiring and exciting. That moment is like that's the essence that drives like. That's like the one good gig out of like the 7 bad gigs that make you keep doing the bad gigs. That, you know what I mean? That whatever that energy is. And so that's a beautiful cap that's what you guys started with and kind of how you cap this record.
Yeah, it's a good way of thinking about it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It was the last thing that we worked on before the record was finished.
Beautiful. Well, guys, thank you so much for your time. The record comes out when?
you.
April 2nd?
No, the record comes out next Friday.
Next Friday? Cool.
Yo, Spike Spiegel here. You just listened to Zig at the Gig podcast. Keep riding the bebop. See you, Space Cowboy. Bang.